All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this warm afternoon in Sacramento. For those of you who have traveled from other warm places, welcome. This is the Select Committee on Renewable Energy Development and Restoration of the Salton Sea. We will have members coming in and out as there are other committee hearings taking place and bills being presented, but we should have a number of members throughout the presentations this afternoon. Joining me today is Assemblymember Chad Mays, who also represents a portion of the Coachella Valley, and I'm going to allow him to say a few words before we get into a couple opening remarks and the agenda. So, Assemblymember.
Well, it's good to be here. Thank you all for coming. It's back in the district. I represent the cities in the Coachella Valley of La Quinta, Indian Wells, Palm Desert, Rancho Mirage, and Palm Springs. And when I'm back there in the desert talking to folks, they often ask, what's going on with the Salton Sea and what are you doing about it to fix it? This isn't anything new. Of course, this has been going on now for decades of trying to figure out a fix, but the time has come that, and we're running out of time, that we've got to find a fix. I do want to say and give kudos to Assemblymember Garcia for his work. I know he's worked incredibly hard, even in putting this select committee together. I know his staff is working diligently here on the state side to make sure that all the agencies and all the stakeholders are together to try to find a fix. And so I look forward to the presentation today.
Thank you, Assemblymember. I'll begin by just recapping our first hearing that we had several weeks ago, where we focused specifically on renewable energy resources out in the Salton Sea area. We had a number of panelists come before us, and if there was one common theme that came from that conversation, at least at that hearing, it was that we know there is an abundance of geothermal energy in the Salton Sea. We know that the state of California is trying to reach higher standards as it relates to renewable energy procurement for the state of California. We also heard that it is possible to utilize some of the geothermal energy that exists at the Salton Sea to meet California's energy goals, and that it could also assist in the restoration efforts of the Salton Sea. And that's, in a nutshell, an hour and 45-minute conversation that we had, some of the takeaways. It was quite pleasing to hear that although there are some challenges to get there, that there is a willingness to explore how to get there. And so I'm very grateful for those who participated at our first hearing. And now we will focus specifically on the Salton Sea. So let me begin by thanking everyone in advance who will be part of the panels speaking on this specific topic. The Salton Sea, for those who are watching and those who will are here for the first time hearing on this matter, is a 35-mile long, 50-mile wide, and 50-foot deep, at its deepest point being the largest inland body of water in the state of California. This massive body of water in our district is shrinking and will expose a dry lake bed that will kick up dust in the region, with adding to the already poor quality standards that exist. Imperial and Coachella Valleys are both in non-attainment in federal air quality standards. As we all know, that in 2017, the sea will shrink at an accelerated rate, when approximately 300,000 acre-feet of water will be transferred away from the sea and sent to other parts of the state. As a result, it is estimated that the sea will have to survive on approximately 700,000 acre-feet of water. This begs the question, how do we best manage the water resources that will be going into the sea for the purposes of aquatic and wildlife habitat restoration and addressing the air quality impacts of the receding sea? The public health and safety of the people that I represent, that Assemblymember Mays represents, is dangerously at risk. Imperial County already has the highest asthma hospitalization rates in the state. doing nothing at the sea will exacerbate this problem. More than 400 species of birds stop at the sea to rest and at the sea to eat. The sea is a critical spot, given California has lost over 90% of its wetlands, making the sea a critical link of the Pacific Flyway. The more than 13,000 birds that were recorded several years ago that died is a prime example of a catastrophic event that can happen if the sea's habitat is not managed and ample habitat is not built for fish wildlife. More than 500,000 people live in the general vicinity of the Salton Sea and will be impacted by inaction. The region's agriculture industry, which provides more than $1.5 billion in economic activity for the region, will also be at risk. Hazards report by the Pacific Institute totals the economic loss of inaction at the sea at $70 billion over the next 30 years. However, we understand that a $9 billion preferred restoration plan identified by the state in 2006 is not feasible. Therefore, we would like to discuss today what are the short and midterm alternatives to address the Salton Sea. What are the available resources and how do we allocate them to address this growing concern? With that, we will get into our first panelist and ask that Dr. Timothy Bradley, professor of California University of Riverside, please, Irvine, please step forward.
Yes, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The points that you raise, I'm going to reiterate and emphasize in my presentation. Let me just say that I'm Tim Bradley. I'm a faculty member at UC Irvine in biological sciences, and I'm also the director of the UC Irvine Salton Sea Initiative, which is an initiative funded by the provost at UC Irvine to bring together faculty from many disciplines that can be beneficial in helping solve these problems at the Salton Sea. Public health, biology, engineering, planning, the law school, social sciences. And we're reaching out to the community there to assist in any way we can. We're also training our students about the issues at the Salton Sea, and we've been working with high school students to engage in science curriculum development in the region. And we also have a reserve in Borrego Springs that serves as our center for studying the Salton Sea and the problems there. So the title that I wanted to choose today was A Path to a Productive and Sustainable Salton Sea, and that's because there's a certain problem that we all face in trying to talk about the restoration of the Salton Sea, going back to the glory days of the 50s and the 60s, which are not achievable anymore. And so restoration or mitigation, all of these are problems. And so I like to refer to it as a productive sea. In other words, one that not only is biologically productive, but is also productive for the economy of the region and beneficial to the populace. And sustainable in the sense that something that we can maintain over a long period of time, which is both sustainable biologically, but also from the point of view of energy and finances and the amount of effort that's required to maintain the Salton Sea. So I think those are the goals that we seek. The Salton Sea is shown here on a map of California, and it's visible even at this scale. It's the largest inland body of water in California, larger than Tahoe, almost as large as the San Francisco Bay. And another way of looking at the Salton Sea is to talk about the communities around it, because they're very important communities around it, including both in the Imperial Valley and in the Coachella Valley. Major highways passing through the region, federal and state parks, but there, as you pointed out, hundreds of thousands of individuals that live immediately adjacent to the sea and whose livelihood and health are affected by the future of the Salton Sea. Michael Cohen was originally planning to give this talk today, but he wasn't able to be here. But he is the author of this hazards report, which, as you pointed out, indicates that if nothing is done, a cost to the region can be on the order of $70 billion, which is a huge cost, both in public health, environment, real estate values, and economic damage. This is a graph which illustrates the level of the Salton Sea since about the year 2000. And you can see that it has been slowly declining, both through changes in agricultural uses and, to a certain extent, the effects of the drought. So I ask you to bear in mind that blue line, and then follow that blue line to this graph, where we also shows the blue line, which is the level of the sea. But in 2017, when water transfers increase, we'll be reaching what's referred to as a tipping point, where there's a sudden increase in the rate of drop of the level of the sea, and this will lead to the production in this region here of beaches, dried beaches along the side of the sea, referred to as playa, which are salty, dusty beaches that are left behind, and which pose a tremendous public health threat through the production of dust. And then in addition, as the sea recedes, the salinity will go up, shown here in brown, and the salinity will go up to a point where we're very likely to lose the fish populations in the sea around this region. And it may even be, as it gets more salty here, that the invertebrate populations will be lost, and we'll go to practically a dead sea, which would be a real detriment, biologically speaking, as well as economically, to the region. This map illustrates in brownish red here the size of the sea when it comes to a new equilibrium with the amount of water that will be available, and shows the size of the playa here, the dried beaches on the outside, which can lead to the production of dust. And we've had testimony from the various air quality districts indicating that this is extremely toxic dust that will cause emphysema and other types of asthma, lung cancer, and all kinds of pulmonary problems. And it has been argued that the soil, we're aware of the problems at Owens Lake. At Owens Lake, the dust is coming off of this kind of playa around the dry Owens Lake. It has been a big problem there, which has led to failure to meet the air quality regulations, federal. And $1.2 billion have been spent in the Owens Valley. The problem at the Salton Sea is much larger. It's a much larger area, and the number of people there is an order of magnitude larger. And it has been argued that the soil perhaps at the Salton Sea is a little different. Maybe it's not going to do exactly the same thing that Owens Valley has done. But here's a picture taken near Red Hill Bay. This is dust blowing off of playa, which has already been exposed. And here it is a few minutes later, and you can see that the dust production in the area is tremendous, and it's a real hazard, and one that we really need to be aware of. You mentioned the fact that the Salton Sea is extremely important as a feeding location for birds, particularly at this time with fish-eating birds. There are a lot of other birds there as well, up to hundreds of species of birds, but particularly the fish-eating birds are dependent on the Salton Sea. It's one of the last salt lakes in the West that still produces fish, and a number of threatened and endangered species are dependent on it, including both brown and white pelicans, cormorants, egrets, herons, and a number of other storks, other birds that are entirely dependent on the Salton Sea. The region is also needs economic development. Imperial County has the highest unemployment rate and the lowest per capita personal income of the counties in California. And you mentioned the very high child asthma rates. It's a region where our efforts, both in terms of the environment and in terms of public health, but also in terms of economic development, would have a profound effect. So the question is, what can be done to reverse the economic collapse that's occurring and the environmental disaster in this particular region? And I think it's important to distinguish between short-term and long-term solutions. So both of them are important. It's important that we have both a long-term solution and a short-term solution. But the long-term solutions are still under discussion, and there are a number of good possibilities. I think the real consensus has developed about the short-term solutions. And I think the time is really here now for us to move forward and address these issues in ways that are where the technology is absolutely there, and we now have a consensus in the region. And these are often referred to as no regrets approaches. In other words, no one is arguing that these may be a bad idea, and they don't interfere with any kind of long-term solution that may eventually come about. They have real benefits right now, and there are no drawbacks in terms of our longer-term planning. So the solutions that are being explored right now are, for example, the construction of marshes, both freshwater and brackish water marshes, around the sea. And this serves to provide habitat for the birds, particularly fish-eating birds, so that if the fish are lost, if and when, it's not a question really of if, but if and when the fish are lost in the sea, that there is habitat for these fish-eating birds. But this also covers the playa and reduces dust production. So this has also the benefit of protecting the public health of individuals in the region, the population in the region. Also, it's our feeling that formation of a renewable energy hub in this region of California could be a very important economic driver for the region. Both geothermal energy, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also solar and wind. All of those are available in the region, and those are resources that can really serve to drive the economy of the region. There are desalination technologies which are already in place and are being investigated, which can provide minerals that are actually an additional industrial product, and that also can provide water locally for some of the marsh projects or for individual small projects. It's our feeling at the university that it's very important as economic development occurs in this region that it be directed in such a way that it really benefits all of the constituents in the region. And so we need to think about how economic development can really raise the living standards of all the individuals in that region, both north and south of the sea. And finally, we think it's very important to have conservation of agriculture. Agriculture, particularly the Imperial Valley, is a very important economic resource for California and for all of the United States. 80% of our winter vegetables are grown in the Imperial Valley. So the Imperial Irrigation District, the Natural Resources Agency, the Salton Sea Authority, and the Torres-Martinez Tribe are all working to create marshes along the receding shoreline right now, which will provide habitat and protect the public health. And the other important thing about these projects is that they are learning processes. There are engineering and biological questions that remain unanswered, and as we move forward through management adjustments, we can learn more about how to build these marshes both effectively and in a cost-effective manner. Here's a picture of the new river, and there's a great deal of drainage water that drains into the Salton Sea, which is available for building these marshes and for managing the salinity and adjusting the biological as well as the public health construction. Here's an example of one of the freshwater marshes that has been built in that area. And we also advocate more open waters with saline waters so that other types of birds can feed there, particularly the fish-eating birds, which need open waters and not a lot of vegetation so that they can find their prey. It's also a very important area for geothermal development. This is an example of a geothermal plant right here sitting next to the Salton Sea, and it has farmland which runs right up next to it. It is completely compatible with farming in the region and completely compatible with the environment. Notice here all the shorebirds which are immediately adjacent to this plant. This type of renewable energy is very innocuous and it has a low carbon output, it is ideal for this type of region. And you mentioned that the Salton Sea is an extraordinary location for that. You can see that there are two real hotspots in western United States. One is at the Salton Sea. The other is right here. It happens to be Yellowstone National Park. I don't think we really want to advocate geothermal plants all over Yellowstone National Park. The Salton Sea is ideal for this type of development. It's currently in place, and actually there are engineers at work using the waste steam, just the steam that's not even used for producing electrical energy, in desalination plants. And this is, again, another product that can be produced, minerals that are used for industrial purposes. So there are a number of industrial and private sector projects that could move forward in the region. In order to have economic development, you need a number of resources. So you need infrastructure and land, a workforce and housing and assets. All of these are available at the Salton Sea. All of that is present. And the output of that economic development is jobs and higher wages and increased taxes and the economy moving forward. So this region is absolutely primed for economic development and for benefiting the people in that region. And that's what we're hoping to see and advocating for the future in this region. So the governor, speaking for the people of California, has quite rightly outlined a number of really important goals for the state. And those include protecting the public health, promoting the economic development of our citizens, protecting the environment. The state has done a great job of moving forward in that area, promoting renewable energy, and fostering sustainable agricultural practices. These projects at the Salton Sea move all of these goals forward in a really important manner, and I really hope that the state will accelerate the way in which it's approaching the problems at the Salton Sea, because there's so many benefits to the people of California and to the region. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Want to welcome Assemblymember Anthony Rendon for joining us, and open it up for any questions of Dr. Timothy Bradley at this time. Mr. Mays, any questions? Mr. Rendon? I'd like to just, I guess, a comment, but maybe follow up with the response to the question here. You opened up with the statement that the Salton Sea, as it was known, recreation facility, boating, water skiing, major fishing, really tied to the tourism industry of the region, that's probably not in the future of the Salton Sea. Can you kind of elaborate on that? And the reason why I asked the question is because I think there are generations of people who live in our region that remember going out there and enjoying those types of recreational activities. And I think visually, that is what many people envision us going back to. So can you kind of elaborate on why your thoughts are such?
Yeah. Well, it's inevitable that the sea is going to become more salty, both because the salts accumulate in the sea, and so over geological time it's going to become more salty, period. But the transfer of water is going to accelerate the increase in salinity. And we've already lost all the major sport fishing species other than tilapia. And the tilapia are expected to die off within the near future as well. So the fishing aspects of the tourism are not going to return. It's not altogether clear what's going to happen ecologically, but one of the things that is likely to happen when the fish die off is that there will be invertebrates such as brine shrimp and so forth that will be very productive in the sea, and that might actually cause it to clear up and be a much more attractive site. So there could be a return of tourism, but it won't be what we had before with the kinds of fishing and those aspects. But boating and recreation around the sea could return. That remains to be seen. I think the most important issues for the short term are the public health issues related to the dust blowing, and the opportunity to improve the economics of the region, which is going to be really important for the way in which people use and enjoy the Salton Sea.
And I
I hope I answered your question.
You have. I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's just the question that, when Assemblymember Chad Mays is asked when he's in the district, what are you doing about the sea?
Yeah.
I think many times people's thought process is exactly, when are we going to get back to how things used to be out in the sea? Of the many things that you highlighted as potential solutions, whether they were in the short-term or long-term aisle, none were this sea-to-sea connection. And we hear a lot about that approach. Just today in the local paper, there was a Valley Voice, it's called, a local resident voicing, the concept of connecting to the Pacific Ocean, connecting to the Sea of Cortez. Can you, from a practical standpoint, share your thoughts on that particular approach to bringing in water to the sea, which we know is one of the challenges that we are going to have with the water transfers going out?
Well, I would rank that as one of the longer-term solutions that's being investigated, and in my opinion, I mean, this is just a personal opinion, I think that's not a viable solution, because there are that project falls into two types. One is to just pump water in order to keep the level of the sea constant, and that will exacerbate the salinity problem, because you'll be bringing in salty water. So as evaporation occurs, the sea will become more salty much, much more rapidly when you're bringing in salt water instead of fresh water. If you pump it in both directions, you could conceivably regulate the level and regulate the salinity, but the amount of water that you'd be pumping would be huge. It would be a very, very costly project to be pumping that amount of water, and that falls into the category of sustainability. We want a solution for the Salton Sea that benefits the region, but also that can be maintained, and which is not a huge economic drain on the state in perpetuity. So that's my personal opinion.
Thank you. Question?
I was just going to add to that, and I know this is just your opinion, but you've studied this more than we have. And actually, I caught on to that, made a note when you said it was not achievable. And do you have a long-term, in your mind, what is the long-term solution? Not just the short-term, but what is the long-term solution? And then who's responsible for the funding to make sure that long-term solution happens? This is your opinion. Your opinion.
I think there are a couple of solutions that still need investigation and where people are still having very reasonable discussions. And one is dividing the sea up so it is a little bit smaller, so that the salinity can be controlled with the amount of water that comes in. That's one possibility. Another possibility is some level of desalination to provide local less saline inhabitant areas within the sea. But I hesitate, because I mean those really still need additional study. But I think that there are technical solutions, absolutely. As to who should pay for them, I think that I would hope that the state and the federal government would step in. These are regional problems, and they really deserve. This is not a problem for the people of Riverside and Imperial County. This is a nationwide problem, frankly. But the other thing is, I think it's very important to bring the private sector in, because I think there's a lot of opportunities for economic development there. This will lead to increases in property taxes and property values and other forms of sales tax and so forth, which will increase the economy of the region and make restoration and sustainable practices much more fundable. So I think the answer is that it's the federal government, but I think the private sector absolutely has a role to play in helping the economy of the region. And I think with the economy of the region improve, then the resources will also be available to deal with the sea.